Good afternoon, colleagues. This recording was made today, the 29th of October, and we are introducing Tegan Scott, who has provided background support to John Mansfield in the CNTA compensation workshops, which are available for download on the CNTA website under the Compensation tab. Tegan has also worked as a research assistant to the Central Desert Native Title Services on tenure scoping research for a compensation claim, and she has experience in GIS mapping and tenure tracking. Today, CNTA has asked her to discuss the backstory and methodology she's used to identify landscapes and tenures for compensation claims. Tegan is based in Western Australia, so this is one approach to the issue and has some West Australian particularities. Other methods and frameworks, of course, will apply in other state jurisdictions and may need to be adapted to those particular circumstances. Tegan, thank you very much for putting together your slides and talking to us today about the very practical issues and the depth of preparatory research which needs to go on before someone lodges a claim. Thank you.
So this is a suggested strategy for scoping research. It could be applied and executed in the initial phases of researching for a compensation claim. The aim of the approach would be to research and record activities, potentially compensable acts and impacts, and also to connect people who might be well placed to speak about the interrelated effects or might have information about the act that took place. Relies mostly on publicly available information, but also draws on in-house materials that have already been created through the course of research and legal proceedings. So getting started is about thinking spatially about the entire area and how one might break down the landscape into sections. That means that you can look in fine detail at sections and look for activities that may be determined to be compensable acts. So in this approach, you would define areas, say tenements, unallocated Crown land, reserves, and this allows you to use locality terms when you go further into the research and you're looking for documents and approvals and applications. Most of them run on mapping platforms. So having locality terms such as a tenement number or a land parcel ID allows you to search specifically for the area that you're looking at the time. So the main components of the question that you're asking when you're using this approach is, what is the act or activity? Where did the act take place? When did the act take place? And who might be well placed to speak about it? So the what, where and when aspects are usually researched using publicly available information, whereas the who part of the question relies mostly on in-house materials, things like affidavits, your future acts materials, transcripts, and also by drawing on your colleagues' relationships and expertise, also their experience in fieldwork. So detecting the activities. So these activities could be clearing of vegetation, discharging or diverting water, the creation of infrastructure, blocking or altering access points or thoroughfares, damaging or impacting sites and cultural values. Also could include impacts on ecosystems and environmental health. Basically things that might impair people's ability to care for and protect country, things that affect the quality and availability of resources or restrict movement of people and access to places. It's also important to remember that we're looking back starting at 1975. So what's out there? So works approvals, licenses and tenders are quite fruitful in information. Also, there's supporting documents such as plans and stakeholder registers. Technical reports submitted by resource and exploration companies contain a lot of information about infrastructure development, about approvals for clearing and other things associated with the development of resource projects. Annual environmental reports are very rich in information. They tend to detail the hectares of ground disturbance in resource projects with a type of a permit. So any bit of ground disturbance really needs to be approved and recorded, and that's reported on every year. Registered and lodged heritage places. So by looking in Western Australia on the Aboriginal Heritage Inquiry System, you can get information on the registered and lodged heritage places. Also, the basic information of all heritage surveys that are held by the authority. And often these have spatial ranges attached to them. So if you are searching by tenement or unallocated Crown land, or if you're using your own spatial boundary, it will pull up anything associated with the geographical location. Expenditure data allows you to graph spikes in expenditure, which usually indicate things like large infrastructure expansion, which if there is a year where you see a spike in expenditure, then you can look specifically for approvals in that year, or look at your historical satellite imagery. Also, georeference data held by mining authorities and government departments. Satellite imagery is really useful information. It is publicly available. It goes back to 1972 when the first Landsat Satellite 1 was sent up. It operates on a 16-day interval, which means you are getting a full picture of the Earth's surface every 16 days. Obviously, you need to allow for cloud cover and things like that if you are, looking at an area that might have those sorts of weather patterns that are heavy in cloud, monsoonal patterns, things like that. It can be patchy over your wet season. Possibilities are immense when it comes to satellite imagery. You can, it is possible to see a spike in expenditure, not be able to, find the documentation of what the activity was that warranted that expenditure spike, and be able to go and look at satellite imagery, see a change in the environment, know a little more closely where you're looking for, and follow that thread from there. When looking at the who section of the research question, you're looking to connect people to places and relying on, existing materials that are held in-house. So that's things like affidavits, court transcripts, research materials, heritage records, future acts, potentially connection materials. Also, drawing on the expertise of your colleagues, of particularly anthropologists and field workers who, may know, if you're talking about this place or this thing that happened, this person can speak about that, or I know that, that this person, has often mentioned that area or, that act. So, yeah, using those materials and looking for when people are speaking about certain things that have happened and connecting that. Hopefully in a way that's geo-referenced is helpful, because you are then attaching that information about people to information that is attached to a specific place. So grouping and layering. So this is, the advantages of this systematic approach would be that by layering the compensable acts and heritage, places of cultural value, and the identity of the people who have spoken about these places before, in your in-house materials, a scope might come together pointing to location and people that you could speak to for the purpose of further study. And it may well be in the course of research and fieldwork that new threads and directions emerge, and you can bring up things that the scoping research didn't bring up. But the strategy can provide a jumping off point and the means to understand what has happened and who you might be best starting off speaking to about what's happened in specific areas. And also, by layering this information, you're getting a sense of the cumulative impact of things that have happened since 1975, which is definitely something that you do see in time-lapsed satellite imagery, is that you are seeing definite changes in the landscape and topography, which, people probably are going to have something to say about. So the pros and cons of the approach would be, a positive would be that it's cost-effective, publicly available information. You can register with organisations and government departments to have a login and to be able to access the information that you need for the strategy, to be able to access mine plans, applications for approvals to carry out different things in relation to geographical areas. It's anybody can register and get a login either as an independent person or as an organisation. Most, I know, in Western Australia, rep bodies would have mineral titles online login, and that gives you access to 10 graph mapping, to the application portal, where all these documents going right back into the 70s are stored and indexed. It can be done in-house. You're using existing research materials, so you're drawing on, the research that has been done already by the rep body or land council, and really making the most of information that has already been created and materials that have already been crafted. It builds a detailed and cumulative picture. So you're finding a lot of detail, and you're also able to show how, these isolated kind of acts have built in a cumulative sense to change the environment, the landscape, access to places, the existence of features in the landscape. It's a jumping off point. It's somewhere to, maybe get started and see where it goes from there. There are a lot of variables and different ways that you can do things, and different things that you might want to look at, but it is a jumping off point. The outputs can be multi-purpose. You are creating a very detailed tenure history, which, could potentially be useful in different types of negotiations, or in making detailed records of what has happened over the time. And it also could lessen unnecessary impacts on people. You are identifying a good place to start. You're also excluding areas that, you don't need to or can't go and research, that won't be included, and therefore not going and kind of bringing up all of these issues of loss or, shame and things like that, unless you really need to have those discussions. So cons. So one thing is that it doesn't fall neatly into a discipline. So it's not something that falls into one person's role neatly. It draws on a lot of different brains around the table. You know, it's place, it's GIS, it's people and culture, it's anthropology, and it's also, you know, the legal framework that it's in, and, you know, the compensable act, what is a compensable act, and the categories and areas that need to be excluded. It is also legal, and so it is a interdisciplinary design, I would say. It's very time consuming. It's a lot of desktop research. It is looking at the same project for quite a period of time, and you know, like I said, breaking it down into areas can make it feel a little more achievable, but it is time consuming. The chicken or the egg problem means, do you find out where people have spoken about, you know, do you look for information where people are talking about a change or a impairment or a sense of loss, and then look for potentially compensable acts in that area? Or do you look for the compensable acts and then start looking through materials and connecting people, and then looking for the stories attached to that I guess is going to be on a case-by-case basis. All areas are different, and the approach, I'm guessing, will be different. People are also going to have different questions that they're asking. And access to in-house materials. So I think it depends on the organisation, but processes and levels of access to existing information, gendered information, different types of legal information that is something that's really got to be worked out by the team that's looking at it, and how that is going to be accessed, and also how it will be included. Can it be included? What types of things can be included? And yeah, so take-home points. This is a suggested approach. It's a way to potentially get started, but it definitely needs to be specific to, you know, what your goals are, what information you want to include, and what types of things you're wanting to explore. Each area and compensation claim will be different. The topography is different. You know, groups of people are different. There's, you know, it's not homogenous, you know, strategy that's going to work everywhere with everybody and every type of geography and every type of tenure. So it's definitely everywhere is going to be different. Georeferencing field notes, which is something that I could talk about a lot, because I think there's so much technology now to be incorporated into field practices, and the time that it saves georeferencing information as people explain things and talk about areas, the ability to go to an area, drop a pin, add information, and that to be able to essentially go straight into a map over the top of all the other layers of information is really valuable, even if you're not specifically doing compensation research, if you're not doing fieldwork specifically for that. You know, people might be wanting to talk about something that's happened in the past, and, you know, that could be useful down the track when you get to that point. And so, you know, when people mention places, you know, getting out a map and zooming in and just dropping a pin and recording some general notes to go back to, or making a note of the date so you can attach your field notes to that, would be very, very helpful, I would think. And better too much than too little. So this could generate a lot of information, but it's better to have everything and, cut and limit and narrow the scope from there, rather than wishing that you kind of had have included more, or that you had have looked a little more carefully. I'm assuming you get one go. So to include everything, might, I think, be probably the better way to go on that front. So yes, that is the suggested approach.
Thanks, Tegan. I'd like to ask some questions now.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier on, you talked about being able to log in and register as a user on websites. What sort of websites were you referring to?
I was referring to the Department of Environment websites and portals, or the websites where people register and track applications to access groundwater or to develop infrastructure. And every state has a different type of portal or a different system of approvals, and that is probably part of the getting started, would be really having a look, asking people when you're looking at a piece of infrastructure, it's having an understanding of the history of how these things come be, what are the processes, who's involved in the approval of building something.
So each department, perhaps of environment or regional development or infrastructure in each state, will have some responsibility in this area. And really the key is to find out which departments do what before you start your search, so that you know which websites to go to.
Yeah, and often in the course of research, you might come across a piece of information that points to another approval that might have happened. And that's where then you kind of build a system of researching area by area as you get a better picture of the types of things that happen and the types of approvals that made that possible.
Thank you. You talked about different approaches. In this talk, you talked about pros and cons. How would you characterise the approach you've used here?
I'd say it was very systematic, and I think in being systematic, then you're making sure that you're covering all areas that have been identified that need to be covered. So I'd definitely say systematic and, with a fine detail approach.
And you also talked about the chicken and the egg situation. Did you go for the egg or the chicken when you started your research?
I think that by starting looking at potentially compensable acts and, really doing a sweep of everything that you can find that's happened in an area, means that then when it comes to people going out and doing the research and talking to people, if you have that information in a layer, if someone mentions something that might have happened in a general area, you could probably go and have a look at, okay, what acts have we got that have been recorded in that area that they might be talking about? Would a reduction in a resource, that people are describing, you might be able to go and have a look at some type of approval or environmental impact that might have happened around there that's led to what people might be describing.
And I note that you said you preferred an interdisciplinary approach to looking at tenure histories for compensable acts and that matching of people with place. Can you explain what you see as the particular values of an interdisciplinary approach?
Well, I think that there is a bundle of histories and activity and relationships involved. And from a GIS perspective, you could go in and you could run scanning over areas, look for environmental change, look for changes in infrastructure. But that in isolation to stories of the people in the area doesn't really make sense. You might miss something. If you don't have an idea of a story or a song line or places of importance around there from your anthropological heritage colleagues, then, you know, something that you might think isn't important could actually have been something that really needed to be looked at. Also, from a legal's perspective, you do need, you know, the lawyers to explain to you what areas, you know, might be subject to certain agreements and need to be excluded from your study area.
And I note that you suggested one of the forward-thinking strategies people might have is that when they are talking about the cultural landscape, to make sure that they actually map particular sites so that when you come back to look at this material later on, you've already got some basis to look at tenure histories. Is that what you were suggesting?
Sorry, frozen. Yeah, I think that by thinking about geotagging and georeferencing information, you're opening up possibilities for web mapping and for interactive mapping. And these are the tools that can be used in the field, where on a tablet you can have a layer of things that have been researched and identified and be actively adding to those layers and building that tenure profile and building a continuous surface of culture and stories and places, but also the activities that have taken place over time.
Good. Well, that answers my question. But if you were going to sum it up, your methodology, Tegan, what would be 5 key steps you'd tell people to adopt when they're starting out? Let's just say that Mary Smith has been given this task and she really has no idea where to start. What would you say the first 5 initial steps might be?
Okay. I would say get a team, more brains around the table. I'd say identify an area and break it down into manageable pieces. It can seem like a lot in the beginning, but if you break things down into manageable pieces, areas into manageable pieces, then you have a system to work through. And you can also start to see your progress as you're going along, because it can be a long haul. I would say, sorry, wait.
All right, so we've got a team and we've got breaking down into small parcels. I guess you want to know departments you might go to and search it.
Yeah, it's seeing what's out there. What information is out there? What can you access free? Also, what can you access yourself? What is available to any member of the public who finds out? And I think you'll find a lot. There is a lot. I would say ask questions, call places and ask them how do these approvals come about, or if you're stuck using a platform, and a lot of them do run on a mapping platform, call the places, and quite often departments will be helpful in explaining to you how to sweep tenure and how to look for approvals and you know, helping you to access parent files and things like that. If you don't ask, you probably won't find out.
That's very good advice, I think, because we don't have to go it alone. So quite often departments will be helpful. It is publicly available information, so you don't have to feel you're ringing up and asking for secret squirrel material.
No. Well, companies, particularly mining companies, do have to lodge their plans and to ask for approval, and they're asking, you know, for approval by the state. And so therefore you need to be able, you know, the public need to be able to access that information. And I don't think you would get apart from with the satellite, I don't think you would get a truer idea of ground disturbance than what you would get from a technical mining report.
Are there special skills needed to read these technical mining reports, or can Joe Bloggs do it?
I think you can read it. I think that particularly in environmental reports, the summary sections are quite clear. But I also think that going to your Future Acts team and drawing on expertise of people who speak to industry often can fill a lot of gaps. I found the Google machine to be very, very helpful, and just building up an understanding of just basic terms. Because these are scoping reports, there will most likely be experts come in and use your jumping off information to go find detail into areas that I guess people are going to identify as areas they want to look more closely at. But just to have a general picture of what's going on, I think, is really important before you commit resources and head out to start asking questions.
Well, that leads me to my next question, Tegan. And what would you say would be the consequence of just saying, well, I'm starting out now, I'm lodging a claim and I'll do the scoping of the tenures afterwards? What's the value of doing all the backstory, back of house research that you're suggesting?
Well, I think from I think personally that if you build a tenure profile before you go out, you're already identifying people that you could go to and speak to. I do hear often in circles about concern of raising feelings of loss and stories of loss with people. And so I guess in a way, it could be a way of minimising having to, have these discussions or, kind of hassle people about talking about these things until you're sure that it really is necessary. And also maybe making sure that you're looking at the right areas and not researching in areas that aren't going to be relevant to the compensation claim. Yeah, it's quite systematic, but I mean, everyone will do it their own way, and there are a lot of variables, and people will have different approaches and want to look at different issues and questions.
Tegan, thank you very much. I think that's a very useful understanding and way forward for people who might be approaching this topic and wondering, where do I get started and what kind of skill sets might I need? So thank you very much.